welcome everybody to this next episode of the Campus CyberCast, where we talk about cybersecurity for higher education. I'm Marshall England, moderator for today's cast. With me, I've got my colleagues from Fortify Data, Eric Smith, who's our VP of Technical Services Delivery, kind of the forefront of customer success and guidance on the product direction, and Victor Gamera, who's the CEO and founder of Fortify Data. And today we have a really great guest in Chris Schreiber. He is a former CISO at a few different institutions, I think University of Chicago, University of Arizona, University of Wisconsin-Whitewater. So you've probably seen some things in your time. And after that, you founded and led Campus CISO, which is your consultancy organization. And we're here to talk about kind of a new initiative that you got with CyberBridge. So welcome, Chris, to the Campus CyberCast.
Thanks, Marshall. Appreciate it.
Yeah. So I just wanted to get started real quick, just in terms of your experience. I think what I'll probably lead with is you probably saw lots of interactions, lots of security practices at your time as a CISO that led you to want to start your own company in Campus CISO. Can you just kind of talk a little bit about that history and how that's gone, and then maybe tell us where you're going next with from there?
Sure. So I have a kind of an interesting background because I've spent half of my career in campus roles and half on the vendor and service provider side, which I haven't run across a lot of people in higher ed that have that unique combination. But it's definitely given me a different perspective, having worked for a managed service provider that was doing security for 100+ colleges and universities, as well as being an internal CISO at some very large research universities. Really opened my eyes to the possibilities of better collaboration between vendors and institutions. Also just seeing firsthand the budget challenges that higher ed in particular faces when it's trying to get cybersecurity solutions in place was really kind of my motivation to building the advisory practice, where what I really focus on is helping the CIOs and the CISOs take a look at what their capabilities are, prioritize their gaps, and then really understand the vendor landscape about what solutions are out there to help them address those gaps. And basically doing a vendor agnostic advisory practice where I help them look at where they are, where they want to get, and then building a directory of over 1,300 vendor solutions that are in use in higher education and how those map in from a planning perspective.
Yeah, we've seen, not just with us, we've seen a lot of higher education spend a bigger focus around cybersecurity, whether it's, trying to understand their attack surface, how to better operationalize and automate a lot of the disparate solutions that might be employed at different colleges within the university or across different campuses. And so I know certain states have increased funding towards certain school groups that they've got access to help employ more people or get specific security leaders, as well as look at new tools and services to help those institutions strengthen their posture. So that's been pretty good. In your experience, I mean, did it transition from point solution to point solution, or did it always start with kind of a comprehensive risk program and then understand what the gap was at those institutions?
So programs that I managed directly, I tended to take a much more comprehensive approach where I would take a look at the whole landscape and map out usually a 3 to 5 year strategy, because higher ed does not move as quickly as like the financial services industry, for example. It takes a long time to get budget approval, staffing approval, et cetera, to put things in place. When the clients I'm working with, you can see a very big difference based on their overall maturity levels. So when they're less mature, it tends to be very reactive. I see a lot of schools that make security decisions based solely on what an auditor found. So they have an audit gap.
Or the latest attack that succeeded.
Actually, not even that so much. Auditors have the ear of the board. So if an auditor says there's this deficiency, it's pretty amazing how quickly funding gets freed up to buy some point solution to address that deficiency. The challenge I see with that approach, though, is it's kind of the tail wagging the dog, right? You have an audit that says you need to fix X that may or may not be what the CISO actually knows is the biggest risk. but because the board is tracking those audit findings, that's where the investment tends to take place. So I would say as organizations mature, whether it's higher ed or any other industry, they start to make more long-term decisions. But when they're less mature, it's very reactive in terms of what they invest in.
We gave a presentation at an state association of schools not recently, and one of the challenges that came up was, yeah, auditors or the state might find regulations to drive us to do something, but therefore becomes this unfunded mandate. I've now got to go do this, but my budget doesn't necessarily stretch to accommodate it. I can't really drop these other initiatives, and where some of them have enrollment is the big source of funding, and if that's holding flat or declining, it presents another obstacle. What kind of advice do you have for organizations that might be in that boat where, and I think it's ubiquitous. I think everybody's got more requirements, more things to get done, but the same budget pool exists. I don't know if you've come across that before, but what kind of guidance do you give folks for that?
Yeah, I had a conversation with a tech startup a couple of weeks ago where they were laying out their feature set. And I asked a question, I was like, well, are you planning to displace these types of solutions? And you could see this look on his face. He's like, what do you mean displace? Like, we have this great ROI. We can do all these risk mitigation things. I was like, well, nobody's getting net new IT budget. So to increase cybersecurity spend, you're probably having to talk to the CIO about reallocation of their IT spend towards this cybersecurity solution. And I think that the state of higher ed today, with shrinking enrollments, shrinking state and federal funding, we're going to see more and more of that, where people have to make tough choices about where to invest, how to invest. I don't think there's a perfect solution. What I do always advise people is look at whether their investment choices are sustainable. So if you look at some very flashy new solutions that are out there, tend to live in the higher stages on a maturity curve, where if you have a very robust, mature security organization, it makes sense to invest in things like deception technology, for example. But if you have gaps underneath it in that endpoint stack, because you haven't invested in EDR, you're probably not going to get the full value of that deception tech. So that's a big part of what I focus on with CIOs, is understanding where their gaps are, that they're making investment decisions that build on that maturity concept, instead of investing in flashy solutions that they're probably not going to get the full value of anyway.
Yeah, very good. It's a needed your needed sounding board. I'm sure you get all sorts of different scenarios and questions to help these CIOs rationalize, what they should be doing and focusing on from that perspective. Thanks for that. And then I think this might segue into kind of where you're going to with your CyberBridge project. Largely you've been in higher education, but I think you've seen some similarities elsewhere. You take a few moments and just let us know about CyberBridge at this point.
Yeah, so CyberBridge is a new initiative, actually getting ready to launch at the end of this month. One of the things that I've seen from the outside looking in is there's a lot of similarity between higher education, K-12, state and local government, and healthcare. All these verticals tend to have budget challenges. They tend to have large infrastructures, large constituents that they're trying to support. And so they're looking for very cost-effective measures to manage their IT and manage their cybersecurity. And I noticed a couple of trends. One was that the CIOs I work with started asking if I ever thought about expanding what I do beyond just cybersecurity. And so I started taking a look at how could I actually support broader IT and technology conversations. But the other thing is I really want to encourage cross-pollination of ideas across these verticals. People that work in healthcare, education, and government tend to be very mission focused. And so they have a lot of similar personalities and what drives and motivates them to be working in IT. And so there's a lot of commonality, but there's not a lot of opportunities naturally for them to interact with their peers that might be in other verticals within this segment. The flip side I've seen is probably every week or two, I get a vendor that reaches out to me that wants to work with Campus CISO. But what I started realizing is they didn't really want to work with Campus CISO. They wanted access to my customers. And it's really I think everyone is facing challenges of how to actually do effective marketing and build relationships. Email is rapidly diminishing in value. I think as people increase their spam filters and get bombarded with a lot of vendor communications, people just tune out with email. So I started thinking about these two scenarios. How do I bridge a gap between education, healthcare, and government? How do I build an ecosystem where vendors can actually showcase their thought leadership, just like this podcast that you guys do? There's a lot of good free resources out there that could help people do their jobs better that they probably don't even know exist. And so, really, what CyberBridge is bridging between those verticals, education, healthcare, and government, and the vendors that support them in a way that's not salesy, it's not pushy. People can kind of go to the repositories of information, whether it's reported podcasts or white papers that people upload from the vendor side, as well as discussion forums for the IT professionals to actually talk about the challenges they're seeing and what they're trying to accomplish. And so I've actually partnered with Hivebright, and we're getting ready to launch that community right around New Year's, where we're going to start opening it up. It's going to be free for the members to join, really supported by the vendors that sponsor it. And kind of think of it like a year-round virtual conference. Instead of paying for a conference booth, sponsors get a chance to showcase their leadership in front of decision makers in a way that's not pushy, gets you out of that email death spiral of trying to get people to actually see your messages, and hopefully help people in these really important verticals to do their IT and cybersecurity jobs more effectively.
Very good. That's a great overview. I'll put this cyberbridge.link. That's the URL. Is that right, to sign up?
It is. Right now, it's just got a placeholder to sign up if you're interested in updates, but it will be going live here soon.
Yeah, no, so I'll just show this for those that are watching it visually, cyberbridge.link, sign up for the updates there. And I noticed you also have a link off of your Campus CISO website as well, so that for anybody that's still going to Campus CISO, you can find the CyberBridge there off of that top link as well. So interesting verticals to kind of cross-pollinate among. Our experience, we see higher education as very collaborative. It's not competitive at all. Other leaders want to help other institutions, with their own problems. We see that with some of the K through 12, and I'm pretty sure it's going to happen with the healthcare space as well. So that's a good way to try and get a lot more folks ingrained in other industry situations and scenarios that might have a lot of applicability or commonality with higher education as well, or local government or healthcare. So that's a good balance, I would think.
I think it's going to be a lot of fun, especially as people start actually using the forums and collaborating with each other.
Yeah. There are other associations, education, healthcare, K through 12. I mean, is it kind of your goal to start working with those as well as another way to try and bridge into that association membership?
Yeah, I've talked with a few. I haven't really explored anything formally yet, but the platform that I'm deploying on is extremely flexible and expandable. So I could definitely see some opportunities for some of the smaller associations that don't have collaboration tools of their own to just kind of plug into this community. And it's flexible enough, I can actually set up their own landing page within the broader portal. So if a regional association of local governments, for example, wanted to plug in, they could set up a sub community within the larger community and have their own conversations, events, things like that within the platform without having to invest in that kind of technology themselves. So I think really the sky is the limit with this. The other thing that I've had a lot of requests for that I'm going to be prioritizing is getting a jobs board created so that the members can post their open positions. And again, people that work in these verticals tend to be very mission focused, where they're going to be drawn to these types of open positions. So this would be a way for them to just really increase the value to the community. And there's some other things that we'll be doing in the future as it grows. But first one is getting enough people using it for it to really be a community.
Right, exactly. Yeah, that's the big initiative is to get a user base within there. On that note, even with jobs or with assistance, I think a lot of we see leaders go from one institution to another, or they see a growth opportunity at a higher level at a different institution, and so they take a lot of the same industry knowledge across from there. And then again, you've got another ally or a collaborator at now a new institution that might have different resources. Eric, I think you had a story, or you got to hear about some collaboration in real time from a previous event that you went
Yeah.
to.
I got to attend an event in Southern California with a large number of community colleges that attended there. And they had a specific forum where they called a number of colleges up to be panelists talking about their recent ransomware events. And this was really interesting to me because I've been in this IT and cybersecurity space for roughly 30 years. There's not a lot of openness in most corporate settings. They don't tell you a lot. There's not a lot of sharing, and like you said, it's not very collaborative because these are potential competitors you may be giving away information on and so forth. Whereas with colleges and universities, that's not the case. And this was super interesting to me because I think they had 6 people on the panel, and they all went through in detail. I mean, really almost embarrassing level detail about what happened with these ransomware events from beginning to end, and sharing all this. So first, the transparency was amazing to be able to get all this detail in the first place. But what was also interesting was the commonalities between all of it. Chris, what we've seen in our client base is that just speaking on higher ed here for a moment, is it's a very challenging environment for these people to operate in, to say the least. Typically, you have a centralized IT group that is charged more or less with keeping the university safe from threat actors. But while they have a lot of responsibility, they don't necessarily have a lot of authority. Getting things done takes a lot of time. A lot of departments and schools within the university do their own thing. And the central IT group has a very hard time getting visibility onto what's going on. A lot of them don't know what their attack surface looks like. They don't know what vulnerabilities exist. They don't know when people are doing things. And then without visibility, there can be no remediation. You can't do anything about something if you don't even know it exists. And then needing that information in order to work within the hierarchy at the university to say, hey, these schools or these departments are actually placing the university at risk. Here's the hard data that backs that up. But in going through the ransomware things, some of the things were brought up is, for example, they had end-of-life firewalls. They had large chunks of their infrastructure and software were out of support. And I'm not talking about just by a little bit, by a lot. And I got the opportunity to ask a question to the panel. And this was both revealing and somewhat depressing. I asked all of them, I said, when this attack came, did it surprise you in the slightest? And to a man, every single one of them said, nope, not at all. This was a thing we knew we were bad off. We knew we had major holes in our defense, and it was just a matter of time. And then they went through all the different details about how they reacted. One thing that did come out of it that was rather interesting is that the experience they had with their cyber insurance company and the FBI was wildly varying between colleges. And that was a nice insight I took away from it, being this is something you should investigate before you have an event. You should understand what your cyber insurer can do for you. You should have all the contact information. And oh, by the way, have backup contacts, because some of these colleges, one of the first things they did is they took down their email, Teams, and voice over IP. They ended up having to communicate via walkie-talkie. But this is not small stuff. It's one of these universities was taken down during enrollment for, I think it was nearly 40 days. 40 days. And you can imagine the financial impact that had to the university. I asked them if they knew what the number was. They said, we don't know, and nobody is interested in finding out, which means it would have been a big number.
I've seen that a lot too, where a lot of times when you're outside of higher education, the focus is, well, quantify the financial impact of a cyber event and use that as your lever. But what I've seen in higher ed is they can't quantify it, and even if they can, it just kind of gets overlooked. It doesn't necessarily translate to a risk to the institution as long as they can absorb it either through insurance or other discretionary funds. As cybersecurity professionals, we know it would have been cheaper to be proactive, but it's really hard to convince people when they're shuffling budgets around due to other financial stresses to make that kind of a decision.
Well, Chris, here's an interesting lever that we've discovered in our client base, and this took me very much by surprise. In addition to doing risk management for the university, we offer third-party risk management. And usually organizations use that to evaluate their suppliers, their vendors, their supply chain, okay, to see what kind of risk that might be placed, that might be bringing into the equation. One thing we spotted that was unusual is that all these universities, in addition to their suppliers, they were putting in bunches of other universities. And I thought, why is that? And so we have really good relationships with our clients. So I asked some of them, and they said, oh, well, those are all the universities we compete with. And their rationale was very telling. They're using the risk scores and data that we generate on these other universities to either point out, hey, we're doing really good compared to everybody else, or hey, we're doing really bad compared to everybody else. In the latter case, you can see how they're leveraging that, because whereas you might not be able to quantify the dollar impact, nobody likes to be near the bottom of the pack. It's kind of an ego thing.
Right.
Yeah, and it's really ingrained in higher ed as an industry. Part of their accreditation process is they have to list who their peers are. And so almost any higher ed institution that you talk to, they can rattle off who their peer institutions are, and they have true peers and they have aspirational peers that
Yes.
they want
Yeah.
to look up to. And that's very ingrained in the culture. And I've seen the same thing with Campus CISO. One of the most impactful reports that I have in Campus CISO that CIOs go to is a benchmarking report that shows their cybersecurity posture compared to other institutions. And it shows, are they above or below? Basically, I do one standard deviation from the mean for all the different scores. And for the most part, people want to see that they're near the top edge of that. What is that middle of the road? But I know you guys did a session with Isaac Abbs a couple weeks ago or a couple months ago with Pima Community College, and his rationale is very different. He's like, well, of course I want to be above average, but I also want to know, am I doing good? How do I compare to like a Fortune 500? And so I actually had to tweak the benchmarking reports a little bit based on his feedback, because he wasn't just looking at exceeding his peers. He also wanted to be able to show how are we doing overall from a maturity perspective.
Well, Isaac's a rare bird. He's really dug into this, and I think he's one of our better success stories, in that when he first started out, their score was quite bad, and we found a bunch of stuff that they were utterly unaware of. But to his credit, he took very quick action on this, and we see a progression very quickly within, I think, 2 to 3 months of starting using us. Their score went from bottom to near bottom of scale to near top of scale, and then it stays there. And that's why I love working with the guy. He's taking this stuff seriously and doing things about it.
And I've been working with him for a few years now, and what always amazes me is he gets things done despite having a small staff and a small budget. So
I don't know how he does
a lot
it.
of times you'll run into this idea that higher ed can't do cybersecurity.
Yeah.
But I've met several people like Isaac that actually dig in, get things done, despite the obstacles that they have as a higher ed institution.
Yeah, we had a good discourse on that chat about working with his stakeholders and his higher ups and making sure they understand what, the goal is and what's needed to achieve that goal. And I think that was something that was a really good takeaway for other schools as well. So, yeah. On to the kind of the next topic. We talked about kind of vulnerability management or vulnerabilities leading to breaches. From that regard, we here at Fortified Data, we started publishing a report about 5 months ago that kind of covers off on vulnerabilities, and then with our perspective affecting higher education. So of all the vulnerabilities out there, what are we seeing that are kind of common that we can alert people to, and do that within the dashboard, and then within this, out of platform report that we look at. And so, we did publish a December report. It kind of goes over the 2026 CVEs, 3 of which are ransomware linked. This in this recent batch. And then we also discuss a couple of other schools that got breached. Mentioned the fact that there are 2 schools that got breached. They were both European, one in Portugal, one in Ireland. They suffered a breach, and one of them had, I think, data loss, so some loss of that data. And then there was another news item that didn't make the report, and I'll show the report here in a minute. But there's a pending settlement for Washington College in Maryland from a data breach from 2023 that included data that was decades old, PII that was decades old, that kind of brings into question, kind of your data retention policies for keeping Social Security and, private information for that long. They're on the hook anywhere between, depending on what the claimants want, there's some hourly compensation for having to go through the process, plus a flat fee, plus credit monitoring. But the range the institution is on the hook for is anywhere between like 65,000 and 65 million if all 13,000 claimants, go for that top end compensation from the settlement if that goes forward. But 65 million, that's a lot to an institution, a small institution that might only have a few thousand. That and insurance, I don't know what they're going to cover, but it's an interesting story to follow. I don't know, Chris, if you have any perspective on something like that.
Yeah, there are several class action lawsuits kind of working their way through the court systems that I've been watching. I think higher ed is kind of interesting because they're stuck between a rock and a hard place. People expect that if they pay for a college degree, that the college is going to be able to verify that they got that degree. And so they have to maintain this PII years or decades after that individual is no longer actively associated with the institution. Early in my career, I worked in housing, and the housing side of universities have to maintain records of who lived where, in some cases, for as long as the building exists.
Wow.
So if you think about it, how do you track that if you're not tracking Social Security number when that's the index that we've nationally created to identify an individual? So for a while, there was kind of the slippery slope where people went down, where they started creating institutional IDs that basically set up as a proxy for the Social Security number.
Like
and
a token,
yeah. And then some institutions took that in really crazy directions, where then they started saying, oh, but we have to protect the institution ID, so now we need a token for the token. And it just turned into this big, messy situation.
It's
But at the end
turtles
of the
all the
day,
way down.
yeah. But at the end of the day, they have to maintain these records somehow. And so they also, as an institution, need to be thinking about how do we secure those records, both from a confidentiality perspective, but also from an integrity perspective. How do you make sure that people really did graduate and that you're not getting in there and fiddling with the records when everything becomes digital?
Right.
So it's definitely a challenge for people that are in IT leadership roles in higher ed.
Yeah, I mean, the tokenization strategy, to me, at least, it's abstracted by a layer. So you got a token, and then you still have to go find the SSN. But it's still a process that has to be managed. And to your point, you still have to have the same safeguards around it. So maybe they decided, no need for the tokenization aspect of it.
Chris, yeah, I got a question / observation for you to see how it tracks with some of your experience on this. There was a Gartner article that came out, I want to say about 3 months ago, that said that the average organization, not just higher ed, but I mean everything, can only manage to remediate between 10 to 20% of their vulnerabilities every month. And based on the data that we see, I'd say that's pretty much correct. Would you say that you kind of follow on that as well?
I would agree that the stat tracks with what I'm seeing. I disagree with the premise that that's all they can do.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, yeah. Well,
a lot of it comes down to prioritization, right?
That's exactly what I was going to say next.
Yeah.
If you as a leader want to prioritize fixing and remediating vulnerabilities, you can do it. Even in higher ed, where you have a lot of decentralized decision making and highly distributed IT management across many different leadership groups, you can still do it. But it takes a lot of time and effort, and you have to do that upward communication, which a lot of times the CISOs at these institutions are buried multiple layers deep in the organization. They may only meet with the president once a year, if that, or maybe the board once a year or once a quarter, where it's kind of a pro forma kind of rattle off. Here's all the projects that we're doing. They don't really have in-depth conversations. But if you have a leader that's highly motivated and has data like what you're able to produce through your product, and you can track trends over time, I've seen institutions actually turn that around fairly quickly when they're motivated to do so.
Well, and the other observation I'd make is this, is that whatever the percentage is actually achievable, and it's going to vary from institution to institution for obvious reasons. But the 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 thing that matters, or the thing I look at is this: is let's assume the figure is 30% is reasonable. I can remediate 30% of the vulnerabilities, both existing and new ones that have popped up this month. I can plan to remediate roughly 30% or 40% per month. What that really means, though, is you better make very, very sure that the ones that are in that 40% are actually having a meaningful positive impact on your posture. And you need to be able to back that up with data, because the last thing you want to do is go in front of, the leadership and you say, well, we had this number of vulnerabilities and we fixed this number of them. And and someone says, well, why did you fix this but not that? And you need to be able to have data that backs that decision up. And that's something that back when I used to do IT director stuff, I would have killed to have, because you need it to drive your decisions, but you also need it to cover what you're doing. So if you've got actual, not just vulnerability severity data, because that's what a lot of people have traditionally done. Find all my vulnerabilities, sort by CVSS score, whatever's at the top, that's what we need to work on. But that's been very much revealed to be not necessarily the correct way to approach things, because there's too many other dimensions of risk that need to be factored in. Like, well, what are the vulnerabilities on an asset that has really no impact to the university if it gets hacked? It may be a 9.8 vulnerability, but if it's the professor's, ping pong page, who cares? As long as there's no lateral movement or any other disclosure. Meanwhile, you could be neglecting a CVSS 6 or 7 that's on your student information database. You can't work that way. Not if you're actually going to be trying to minimize risk. So that's one thing Isaac really responded to, is like, this gives me the data not just to make my decisions, but to back them up.
Yep. Yeah, I look at it as kind of a multi-dimensional model, right? You have what's the severity of the vulnerability? Are there exploits in the wild? Is another one that often gets overlooked, usually because people don't have the right tools to give them that information easily. But you also need to understand the criticality of the asset. The other one I tend to, in the old days, I used to focus on more, but now with cloud, it's becoming a little more diffused, is whether it's internet facing or not. So if you had a 100% internal database server versus a database server that was exposed to the internet, you would have to react differently. But with the adoption of cloud, I think that one's becoming less and less critical. Just assume everything's exposed somewhere.
Yeah.
Right. So I'll jump in. I know the topic is kind of lending itself to this, but this is a look at kind of the December report. Chris, you just mentioned something. So let me scroll down and look at so here's the affected vendors in terms of that were included within the CVE list this go around. So you just said something. Is there an exploit in the wild, right? So there's some ransomware linked CVEs. That would help increment your response. Is that right, Chris, to say, hey, if this is in the wild or it's been linked to a ransomware, more attention should probably get focused on something like this. Otherwise, there's a growing list of other CVEs that are across pretty common service providers and technology providers that you would then prioritize based on, well, how are they managing the criticality of certain assets within the institution. I think Victor's one of the ones I know we looked at ahead of time were the VMware ones related to this specific report. Is that right?
Absolutely, absolutely. So I couldn't have said it better, the way Eric phrased it. Prioritization as well as Chris, right? The prioritization across KVs and actively exploited CVs, the ransomware linked CVs, and many organizations can leverage resources like CISA or other products, or even products like the Fortified Data Platform to help them, surface this data set. But there are still many other data sets that are required, and every organization is different. I mean, Chris mentioned, is this an external facing system versus internal? Are they, there was some other data point you mentioned in terms of prioritization of the asset itself or classification of the asset. So there are various ways that an organization or college or university can prioritize these findings to make them more effective at remediating those, that 30% of their capacity or 40% of their capacity. And it does move the needle in the right direction. It's all a matter of surfacing the data in a continuous manner and staying proactive, just like Isaac has been proven. It is possible even with limited resources, with limited budgets. And Chris, I've got a question for you later on with regards to that. But many organizations tend to blame their IT resources or security resources, limited security budgets and limited security resources, for not being able to remediate or remedy all their findings. And that's not the point. It's all about focusing on the ones that truly make an impact to the organization. So going back to the report, Marshall, yes, we do. Based on the analysis, we did uncover. I'm not necessarily sure if it was captured in this data set, but VMware was one of the most commonly used technologies across many colleges here in the States. And they're obviously the KEVs that we are identified on some VMware products were listed on here. So many colleges that obviously are listening in, if you do have KE or if you do have those products, you could quickly identify those CVEs and focus on those. Now, it's important to note that the vulnerabilities or the KVs we identify for November are just, we're 22. So they weren't as, it's not a totaling of the 26 that we identified for, we're identified from December. And the reason we decided to incorporate those is because the first week in December, we're seeing a lot of traction. We're already seeing there were some ransomware triggered KVs. So we decided to merge at least the first week of December into this report. So you'll be able to see 3 ransomware linked CVEs. We think they're so important. And in terms of prioritization, we'll say just focus on these, right? If you see technologies that you're leveraging within your environments and you see they have KVs based on your vulnerability scanning product, or if you want to leverage a product like ours, that's great. But that's where you should focus on. Also considering the other factors, like is this external facing, internal facing, and there are other factors that we see a lot of customers use, like vulnerability chaining. Can this vulnerability easily be used to exploit this vulnerability within the same network or within the same, enforces lateral movement or easeability of lateral movements within the organization? There are many other factors, but it's all about prioritization. It's all about prioritization. So that's the purpose of this report. In addition to the KV and vulnerability data and remediation efforts, we also highlight like a vendor of the month.
Oh yeah, I was going to scroll to that too.
Yeah,
It's a close out of the report.
So over a 12-month period, we look at various vendors, especially in the higher ed space, to present them based on their security hygiene or cyber hygiene, how they've been performing over the last 12 months. And this is one where we decided to highlight Instructure,
Campus
right?
LMS
And
Instructure.
they're the company that produces the Canvas LMS. It's many other higher ed related products. but we decided to highlight this particular vendor because of the improvements we've seen over time. We've seen them present over time. Technically, we did some analysis and we saw a 24-month period, and we decided to just highlight the 12-month period. But they've demonstrated that they can maintain a certain level, which we categorize as a low risk area, especially within this industry, based on some benchmarking data set that we also leverage. So it's all captured in this report. And let's see what else. I think that's pretty much it for the December report itself. Now,
Yeah,
it's interesting, Marshall. One last thing that it's interesting because, like I said, we identified 2 ransomware linked CVEs the first week of the month, and there are many others that are starting to evolve over the last week. And I would say staying proactive, leveraging a solution that can give us that sort of visibility on a continuous basis is very important.
Yeah, especially going into, the holiday season, and, in between semesters, you might have, a smaller micro semester or interim semester.
Marshall, something else just popped
Yeah.
in when you said that too. That's one of the other observations. And since we're talking about campuses here, this is particularly important. Bad guys, they know a few things about you that drives their timing. For example, they try to focus their attacks on when you're doing enrollment because they know that's a busy time and you can't afford to be down. They'll also try to focus on times when you may not expect it, like holidays, because they know you're going to be short-staffed. Okay, they do this. The other thing that really got my attention that I didn't even think about is that your college will frequently make press release announcements about, well, we just received a big endowment or something along those lines that indicates, oh, we've got money now. And that will attract bad guys. They are watching this stuff.
Right.
So keep that in mind. And that kind of tees or intersects with something that Victor was mentioning just a moment ago, and that is continuous. We've got the report we showed here. The even if your landscape doesn't change, if you don't have stand up new assets or services or whatever, the threat landscape is constantly changing. And just a little anecdotally, we had a client who they saw their risk score take a drop. Wasn't huge, but they took a drop and they went and looked at it and they said, "Why did this drop? I didn't get any new vulnerabilities, and there's no new exposure. Why is this the case?" And we looked at the data and it says, "Well, because this particular vulnerability a week ago wasn't under active exploitation, but this week it is."
Mhm.
And so now your risk for that particular vulnerability has gone up. And if next week there's bad guys quit using it in their toolbox, the risk will go back down. But being able to track that stuff that's really the key thing, because a lot of this data is publicly available data that you can pull. The problem is getting it and then keeping it up to date.
Automated
Yep.
process of
We had a banking client that came in and he said, after he looked at our platform, he said, I've been trying for the last year to build his own data set to do this. And he said, I can do it more or less, but it takes me 3 months to get all the data together. And by the time I get all the data together, it's out of date and useless to me. You're telling me you can do this constantly? I'm like, yeah, that's what we do.
Yep. I think that kind of goes to a philosophy I've always held around security. You're never going to have perfect security. Even if you had unlimited budgets and unlimited management support, you're never going to be able to fix everything. So I think people need to redefine what success looks like. And I've always defined it as, are we better than we were yesterday?
Mm-hmm.
But that requires a couple things. You need to be measuring where you are, because if you're not measuring, you'll never know if you were better than you are yesterday. But you also, that upward communication about what your goals are for your security program is also very critical. And if somebody wants you to move faster, you can have plans in place of here's what it would take in terms of resources and budget to move faster. But here's what we're doing with the resources we have, and being able to demonstrate you're being a good steward of those resources is really important as a security leader.
right. Chris, I have a question for you. So earlier you mentioned, you work with a lot of colleges and universities that, you're starting to see shrinking enrollments and so forth. So budget is there's no telling where things could be in the next 5 years with their shrinking budgets, obviously. So they have to be very strategic, and you assist them with that through your organization of where to invest and what to invest in. How does uh utilizing a product that we know is solves a major problem for the client or for the college, and it's widely used in the industry, how do you assist colleges and universities to either leverage those products or find alternatives that solve similar problems? It may not be the bigger brands, but and how do you factor in the cyber hygiene for those vendors? Is that one of the factors that you leverage or that you analyze in order to demonstrate the value?
So I don't dive into the cyber hygiene of those vendors very much. I kind of leave that to my clients' third-party risk management processes.
Mhm.
So third-party risk is one of the categories that I actually identify that they need to invest in, but I don't actually dive into doing that myself.
Right.
What I really focus on is sustainability and making sure that they have broad spectrum coverage. So what I've actually developed is a framework I call the cyber heat map, which takes a look at 14 technical domains. So it has everything from like infrastructure domains like network, email, endpoint, cloud, et cetera. It has a visibility section focused on event management, threat intelligence, and inventory, which you'd be amazed how difficult inventory is to do in a distributed organization. And then I have a sustainability one where I focus on things like assessment tools, governance tools, response for incidents, recovery from a disaster recovery perspective. So that's kind of one axis of the cyber heat map model. The other axis is maturity, where I take a look at foundationally, you want to prevent what you can. Kind of the next layer up is you want to be able to detect the things that get through your prevention layer. Your next layer up, you start building internal investigation capabilities. And then the top layer is mitigation, where you're actually doing proactive things as well. But the way I explain it to people is think of that matrix like a box. So you've got this box that you're trying to fill your budget in. So if you're pouring the sand into the box, the sand spreads out before it starts going up.
Right.
And so to have a sustainable investment model, you need to spread out to cover all the different technical categories that you need to protect before you start going after the more high maturity items. So if you try to invest something at the very top and there's gaps underneath it, obviously that sand's going to fall right down, right? But similarly, if you try to pour all the sand into one column and the columns on either side are empty, that's going to be a really wobbly column, right? So visually, I think that model helps people to think about where they need to be investing. And what I do is I map every vendor solution that somebody comes to me and says, I'm looking at Fortify data or I'm looking at vendor XYZ. What I do is I take a look at their capabilities in terms of this model and then map them into that planning framework. So as they're looking at a vendor, they can see where that fits in with their current capabilities and with their gaps and how that fits into that sustainability model.
Great. Awesome.
Chris, I had an observation I wanted to make since you brought up about the whole vendor management side of the house. One observation I want to see if you've seen the thing or what you think about this. I've had a number of people where they say, we're not overly concerned about the security risk that our vendors might place us at because, let's say I assess a vendor and it turns out they do have a bunch of vulnerabilities. Well, I can't fix any of it. That we're not going to dump the vendor. Why do I care? And the response I have frequently given them is, you're telling me you can't do anything? You're not going to do anything?
Well,
Like,
can they?
well, but but see, you got to think about it. You got to think about it because you can't fix anything with a vendor, and maybe you can't boot the vendor,
Right.
but maybe you will compartmentalize yourself better so that if they do get breached, the damage is limited. Maybe you'll change your backup and your backup policies, your disaster recovery policies, or at the very least, you're going to document this risk and have some kind of a response plan. So when people come and tell me, well, we can't do anything, that's why I say, you can't do anything? You know, like I said, I've been doing IT for roughly 30 years. There's always something you can do. It may not be as
Yep.
effective as going to the vendor and forcing them to fix it or booting the vendor, but you can do something. But here's the point, is that if you don't know your vendor's placing you at risk, you're not going to do anything.
Right. You
Nope.
just do the
And
aftermath.
I think a lot of times higher ed falls back onto that because they
Mhm.
do work with a lot of very niche vendors.
Mhm.
Like they might have a vendor that is managing a multi-million-dollar piece of laboratory equipment that literally there's only one vendor in the world that can support it. And so sometimes the IT people feel kind of trapped because they know they have to run this 30-year-old piece of tech. But what you can do from a risk perspective is segment that piece of equipment.
Mhm.
If it needs to be on the internet using proxy hosts that you're not directly exposing it to the internet,
Mhm.
there's a lot of things you can do to mitigate risk as long as
Mhm.
you know that risk is there and you're
Mhm.
planning appropriately around it.
Do you assist with those services as well? Your organization?
So a lot of what I do is kind of a advisory retainer.
Mhm.
So if the CIO or the CISO has questions, we'll meet weekly or monthly depending what they need. Or if they have something urgent, they can just book a call if they're on a different retainer tier. And so I'll walk through whatever their problem of the day is. So I tend to be very agnostic in terms of what I help them with. Basically, I'm kind of that trusted outside advisor because I did it myself for 20 years. So I've been in their shoes. I know what they're going through and can give that outside perspective.
Very good. Well, unless you guys have any other questions, we'll probably wrap up here with Chris. I think it's been a really good discussion. I'm excited to see how the CyberBridge goes. Once again, that's cyberbridge.link. Is that right? To sign up for anybody who's
Link, yep.
listening. Cyberbridge.link to join the community there for healthcare, higher education, state and local. Is that right?
Correct. Yep.
Yeah, very good. And is that the best way for folks to find you if they want to reach it and get in touch with you through Campus CISO or CyberBridge or LinkedIn?
Yeah, either one. If they go to Campus CISO, there's a chat client right on that website. They can reach me a little more directly that way. CyberBridge, right now they can sign up. I will have some different onboarding materials on there soon. But either one will reach me eventually. So
Perfect. Well, I signed up, so I'm waiting for the materials, and
I saw the notice. I saw it come in.
so we'll see, and maybe other folks can see us on the CyberBridge in the future. But I'll leave it there. Chris, thanks again for a great discussion. Victor, Eric, thank
Thanks
you
for
as
having
well.
me, guys.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All
Thank
kinds
you.
of
care.
fun. Thank you.
Bye.